Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News, and the circus of Formula 1 keeps on going around after Toto Wolff's supposed tantrum at a team principals meeting a couple of days ago at the Canadian Grand Prix. Binotto and Horner have questioned how Mercedes were able to introduce a second stay into practice so quickly after the technical directive was issued. They believe foul play may be afoot once again. Very much intrigued your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Really upset the channel, thank you very much indeed for doing that one. A couple of pieces of news to dive into first. Rumour has it that the French Grand Prix in a few races time, Piastri is going to have his first practice session debut effectively with the Alpine team. Currently an Alpine driver, rumoured right now to be replacing Latifi in the Williams seat next season in some sort of loan arrangement. Now, we'll see how that one goes. Latifi, of course, is probably going to get announced to be gone relatively soon, according to the rumours. They didn't really want to do it at his home race in Canada, so over the next few races, expect that announcement Piastri to Williams is kind of our understanding at the present time. This also to mention unfortunate news, but it seems like more and more likely it's going to be the case at the moment, that Spa is going to be gone from the calendar going forward due to infrastructure reasons, like a difficulty getting to the track and like the amount of people you can have there, and like some infrastructure problems also, and like financial reasons as well. Spa might be gone from the Formula 1 calendar. France is probably going to be gone as well, but Spa, like a legendary track, best circuit on the calendar, I think, like it potentially is going to be gone for next year as the 2023 calendar is closer to being finalised. So yeah, disappointing news on that front, but it's pretty been coming for quite some time now. Unfortunate scenes. Let's dive into this then. I mean, look, let's talk about the porpoising stuff, the bouncing stuff, as Mercedes are now generally calling it. Now, well, here we go from Max Verstappen. I thought it was kind of funny, the kind of post-race press conference imitating what it was like, to be in the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton around Baku. Not so bad, of course, around Montreal. Now, the big discussion has been really from Mercedes that it's not the porpoising that's affecting their car, it's the stiffness of these cars that means over the bumps on the circuit, they bounce around an awful lot. It's not the aerodynamic porpoising effect that they seem to have got on top of now since Spain. Now, well, we know full well there was a bit of a confrontation a few days ago between Toto Wolff and Christian Horner, Mattia Binotto, where Wolff was kind of saying, look, we need to change these rules so that this bouncing isn't a problem anymore, because otherwise it's going to cause a serious accident, or like or the driver's like safety is at risk and jeopardy, really, that of course the FIA have decided to deal with to some degree, but still Wolff isn't particularly happy with the direction that they have taken. Neither are the other team principals, and Christian Horner says that he reckons there was an element of theatre going on behind the scenes there, and even said that with Lewis's new movie coming out starring Brad Pitt, where Lewis Hamilton is producing a Formula 1 movie over the coming years, it seems maybe time to get Toto Wolff involved is what Horner was saying, because of the kind of acting he was putting on in front of the Netflix cameras that we talked about yesterday. Now still, Toto Wolff was kind of passionately putting his point across, the other team principals were kind of doing the same thing, but still, the technical directive that came out from the FIA just a couple of days ago, before this meeting actually, said that okay, the teams effectively will be forced to have a certain level of porpoising on their car, and if the cars bounce or porpoise, I think they even mentioned specifically aerodynamic porpoising, which wouldn't necessarily align with the kind of the mechanical effect that this bouncing seems to be, but regardless of the technicalities of the situation, they issued a directive to say that okay, if your car doesn't comply, you're going to have to raise it by 10 millimeters ride height and keep doing that until it's fixed effectively. Now, a lot of the teams aren't happy about this because they feel like it's Mercedes effectively having some success moving the rules on the goalpost in their favour. Then again, the TD seems to kind of affect Red Bull in a more positive direction, but of course that maybe is just step one of what the FIA might potentially do, and it could help Mercedes, right? I think that's kind of the fear of the teams that are at the front running right now, knowing what the last 8 years have been like to be one of these teams facing up against Mercedes. So this is kind of what Christian Horner said, that it's actually overly biased. What was particularly disappointing was the second stay, because that has to be discussed in a technical forum, and that is overtly biased to sorting one team's problems out, namely Mercedes, of course, that introduced that second stay in their practice session. Actually, I don't think they had it for the rest of the weekends, but we'll see what it looked like here in a second, which were the only team that turned up here with it, even in advance of the technical directive. So work that one out. This is kind of the key suspicion that is being raised, that for some reason Mercedes, despite this technical directive which allowed a second stay, the idea being, okay, a second stay comes through that can help stiffen up the floor, or like effectively make it flex less, and it seems like the flexing of the floor was kind of the key issue that was causing porpoising, right? So the idea from the FIA was, okay, teams are now allowed to use a second stay on their floor to help stiffen it up a bit more, therefore the porpoising will happen less often, even though Mercedes turned out they didn't really need the second stay because they felt like they had the porpoising under control this weekend. Now, I mean, look, Horner and Binotto seem to believe, okay, how exactly did Mercedes turn up here with that second stay, given the fact that they used it on Friday, and it was only only mentioned that it was even allowed on Thursday in this new technical directive. So this is kind of the question that is being asked. So this is what Binotto goes on to say. He wasn't even happy about the idea in the first place that they can change these rules. The technical directive is usually there to provide clarifications, not to effectively change the rules. So just not happy with the idea in general that these teams or the FIA is potentially changing rules mid-season that might potentially in the long run affect teams like Mercedes in a more positive manner. And this is kind of the key question that has been raised. the second support. This is of course what the sport looks like. They're allowed currently one support, you guys can see here at the back, but this was the second one the Mercedes tried out during practice, but I'm pretty sure didn't go with. But they were the only team to turn up here with this actually ready to go, and it's kind of surprising how they were even aware. Like as Horner already says, like for some reason they were the only team that turned up with it, despite the fact that the TD at that point hadn't even come to fruition. And as Bonotto says on the matter, like they were also pretty amazed that Mercedes had been able to react to these new rules so quickly. Toto claimed that they had installed the support cables overnight. I can only see we as Ferrari would not have been able to do this because we just didn't have the time to prepare these parts. Going on to say that there apparently is a rumour that a former Toto Wolff advisor, Shayla Ann Rao, might have given Mercedes a tip. This is kind of a rumour that's been circulating in the paddock, and even like Alpine, Otmar says over there, they must have known about it beforehand. Something like that isn't possible any other way. They must have known that this new TD was coming along, that was going to include this possibility for a second stay. That is the going rumour, and as going to have been described right here, this lawyer, who used to be a former Toto Wolff advisor, just a few weeks ago joins the FIA as Formula 1 executive director, and potentially could have told Toto Wolff and the Mercedes team that, yeah, okay, this TD is coming out over the coming days, therefore get ready to have a second stay potentially you can put on your car, which, I mean, would be kind of incredible if that's the case, right? Definitely, like as Bonotto goes on to say, I have concerns, no question, but the trust in the FIA is there. She is a lawyer and she is professional. I'm confident the FIA in the future can prove that our concerns are unfounded. But just the idea here that potentially a kind of a top lawyer at the FIA has maybe tipped off Mercedes that this is coming is, I mean, look, that might not be the case at all, but Alpine are saying, and Red Bull and Ferrari are saying, like, hey, how would they have possibly had that prepared if they didn't know in advance? We wouldn't have been able to do it as those other teams. Therefore, how come Mercedes were able to? So definitely implying that there might be some dodgy stuff going on here, suspicions going all around the paddock that Mercedes are up to no good effectively in trying to get back into this championship fight. You wouldn't necessarily be surprised if that were the case, to be honest, given how much of importance, championship success does have in Formula 1 and of course other sports as well. So yeah, definitely intrigued to your thoughts on that one in the comment section below. This is kind of a close-up of these stays. This is what the car looked like at Baku when only one stay was allowed. You can see that stay is still here on the back of the car, and then this second one that was introduced, only Mercedes were able to do this because presumably they were maybe tipped off in advance by some sort of FIA lawyer, which certainly would raise some questions and some concerns from other teams, despite the fact that actually at the end of the weekend they didn't really use this anyway. But Otto also went on to say, I'm surprised that a team like Mercedes is so strong to manage it overnight. I can only trust what he says, saying that I'm not going to say specifically that there's kind of dodgy, suspicious activity here, foul play going on, but definitely he is suspicious, skeptical that this was even possible. So we'll see if this ends up getting followed up with any other situations, but maybe Toto Wolff and Mercedes will have to think about that one and their potential sources going forwards, because if this type of stuff happens again, I'm sure there's going to be serious questions continue to be raised. Now, supposedly a further update, a further meeting is going to happen this coming week between the FIA and the teams. We shall see what the outcome of that might potentially be, but right now, Christian Horner said it's overtly biased. These new regulations towards Mercedes, or effectively the fact that they're changing the rules is biased in that way. Of course, he's going to say that, right? Because at the end of the day, Red Bull drivers, supposedly Perez and Verstappen, were both complaining about the bouncing during Baku. They said, okay, it's tough to pick the breaking points out. They were having a tough time with it, as well as the Mercedes guys, although Mercedes, of course, were certainly worse. And of course, Horner's kind of going to downplay that one, the fact that his drivers weren't so happy at Baku, and is going to, of course, play up the fact that Mercedes are just trying to manipulate the rules. It's just the politics of the game. That's how it goes. But of course, as it presently stands, I'm sure that Bonotto and Horner don't really want to agree to allow Wolff anything that might help Mercedes get back into the fight, right? They know what history kind of says over the last several years of the fact that when Mercedes win the championship fights, generally they end up coming out on top, at least on the constructors side. Speaking of Mercedes, thought I'd mention this real quick because Lewis Hamilton, of course, so far this season has had a rather difficult time, let's say, in practice in general, just because he's often been the one using these experimental setups. Even at Australia, I believe he was carrying a bit more weight than George Russell was because he had extra centers on his car. They'd taken off Russell's just to effectively save weight where they could, but Hamilton had them on anyway to get more information, right? And generally, it's been Hamilton's car that's had these kind of experimental floorings and setups and all these different changes, and Russell's effectively driven kind of the stock version that they want to go with, and Hamilton's been having rather a tough time so far. He went on to say yesterday that hopefully Mercedes don't do too many more experiments so far this season. Seems like every single time they've experimented with setup, it's made the car worse to some degree or another, and effectively is saying, okay, look, let's just keep the car the setup the way it is and make sure the setup is okay, and then just, change things aerodynamically or weight saving or whatever that might make this car competitive with the rest of the field. Also mentioning that maybe in the second half of the season, if there are going to be further experiments, maybe George can do them instead of Lewis Hamilton, right? So we'll see if that ends up coming to fruition, right? Might be a key deciding factor in terms of Hamilton getting back on level terms with George Russell in terms of kind of race result performances so far this year. Hamilton's third place over Russell's fourth place at Canada broke the streak, actually, that Russell was almost about to break himself himself of kind of the record amount of race victories or race kind of outperformances, let's just say, in a row against Lewis Hamilton. Rosberg held the record with 7 races where he outplaced Lewis Hamilton in a row in 2015, 2016, and Russell had tied that at 7 in a row going into Canada, but of course couldn't quite break the streak in the end. Just to mention this before we close out the video as well, best and worst position in 2022 so far. This of course being in races itself. Hamilton was 13th, or was that back in Imola? Third, of course, is his best placing so far this year. Sainz has been, excluding retirements, only 2nd through 4th, Russell 3rd through 5th, Leclerc 1 through 6th, of course, that 6th place was back in Imola, and of course 5th place here most recently in Canada. Verstappen pretty impressive, of course, whenever he finishes a race, he's never finished lower than 3rd, and then also we can look all the way back to Latifi, actually, he's pretty impressive so far this season, only finished, well, hasn't finished so far this season lower than 16th, Nicholas Latifi, so impressive work. Hopefully he can keep up that top 16 streak alive. This also to mention before we close out, because a pretty important thing has been mentioned here in terms of the kind of tyre compounds going to be used for the remaining, well, the next few races. Grand Prix, of course, in Britain at the Silverstone is, of course, going to have the hardest tyre compounds, very, well, heavy tyre wear track. But after that in Austria, it's once again the softest compounds, which is kind of an interesting decision given the way that track is laid out, and then France and Hungary kind of going down the middle, right? So interesting certainly for Austria, I thought, and of course Great Britain already announced as pretty much expected. And just to mention this before we close out here about the Canadian Grand Prix, there has been in every single year that they've raced in Canada since 2010, a Mercedes-powered car on the podium. Hamilton and Button back in the day on kind of McLaren Mercedes as it was, and then pretty much it's always been, well, Valtteri Bottas even in the Williams briefly, Hamilton, Rosberg and Bottas, of course, as well in the Mercedes the last several years. But very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always, take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.